Okay, so if you're watching this, chances are all your lectures have been cancelled and your university is closed, but you still want to maybe learn something. So hopefully this can be kind of beneficial and help you with the fundamentals, and then as I make more of these, we'll gradually build our way up and we'll do some really cool stuff. So I'm going to start with the absolute basics on this one. We're just going to rotate this guy. This guy you can grab from this website, close-up view of man dancing, hip-hop, blah blah blah. You get a free download. Great, free to use. Happy days. It's 4K. Let's get started. So the first thing I think you should always try and do when you rotate something is just track something. Even if you can't track your subject, like here, there's probably not a lot of details. Like you can maybe pull something to get the rotation of the arm, but just track something in the plate, because this shot is handheld, so there's going to be wobbles of some sort that we can get rid of. So I'd say grab 2 points on the plate, probably as sort of opposite side as you can, because the further away these 2 points are, the more errors get averaged out. So we're just going to do the first 24 frames. We'll just rotate 1 second. And hopefully this is going to show you that rotate is really cool, really fun. And when you do it efficiently and when you do it the correct way, it's not something to be very scared about. And you can get it done really fast. And even once you're, if you decide to go into comp rather than stay in paint and rotate, rotate is still something you're going to do all the time, just smaller tasks. But you need to be able to do those small tasks quickly, otherwise you're costing everyone money because you don't need to. So I'm just going to tick this on to make sure that the translation, rotation and scale is included. And you could do a corner pin on this if you want, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to do a 2-point track. And now we're going to stabilize the plate. When I was being taught Roto at DNEG, literally rule number 1 for us was stabilize the plate. So before we do anything, stabilize it just so you know what you're dealing with. So now that this is stabilized, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I've got the right reference frame. And what I like to do is I like to type ref frame equals, and then here, just do a little TCL command, which is value reference frame. And what this will do is it will put a note on your tracker node that whatever your reference frame is. So if people are picking up your scripts, they can know. And all that's happening is this is telling you the value of the knob on this node called reference frame, which here is this guy. And you can tell by the name. So if we wanted to get the jitter period, we could do that. But I don't think I've ever used this in my life. Maybe it's really useful and I'm wasting all my time. So yeah, now that this is stabilized, you can start to sort of break the motions down. We're not stacking the jitter of the camera on top of the motion of the arm. We're only dealing with sort of one variable at a time. So what I like to do is I like to do my roto on this stabilized plate, and then afterward we'll apply it to the unstabilized plate to minimize any filtering or any problems like that. So when you're rotating something, what you want to do is I'd recommend using B-splines. Pretty much everyone uses B-splines, but some of the most talented people I've seen in my life have used swear by Bezier's, and we use it for everything. So yeah, but for now use B-splines. For those of you that don't know, the difference is Bezier's, you control the point, and then you have feather, and that's all you have to worry about. But with Bezier's, you actually control how much they're warped. You have these handles, which can be useful, but for now, keep it simple. We're just going to use B-splines. So what you want to do is you want to break down the shape you want to roto into its sort of largest non-deforming parts. So for this arms are really great because for the most part they're fairly smooth, undeforming shapes. So what we do is we just, I'm going to pick a good frame here where the silhouette's really obvious. And what you want to do is you want to put your points where the actual object would be if there was no motion blur. So for this, what I'm doing is I'm not going to the hardest pixel, which some people like to do. I'm not going to the softest pixel. I'm going in that middle line. And then once we've got the shape in the middle line, and we've got everything kind of tracked, I like to, rather than some people get really put off by Roto because they think you literally, like, on every single frame you just do stuff. And what I'm doing here is I'm pressing Control to set the pivot point. But you don't want to do that. You don't want to move it on every single frame. Definitely if you don't have to. Try and sort of analyze the motion of this arm before you do anything. And then from there, pick where you want to put your keyframes. So what I'll do is I'll just put one at the start. And what I like to do sometimes is I like to put my shape in a good point at the start, good point at the end, and then fill the middle in where I need to, or where it becomes most distant from where it should be. Yeah. And other people as well will say, don't move your points at all if you can avoid it. Just try and do everything using the scale options. And I think when you're starting out, that's really good advice, because it's called edge boiling. If you start messing with your individual points and you don't know what you're doing, you can have really wobbly edges, and your motion blur can also be really wrong. But I do know what I'm doing, so I'm going to just move these just a little bit, just to get the general shape. But if you look, I'm not moving it that much. I'm trying to keep it consistent. Consistency with Roto is king. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of scrub through this, and I can also hit M, click replace to get rid of the original alpha. I can hit M on the keyboard as well to see my alpha, and that will enable your map overlay. So if we look at this now, we can see that on this frame it's totally fine, and on the first frame it's totally fine. But we, in the in-between frames, we're starting to get some distance. And the most distant frame from where it should be, I'd say is probably this one, because its scale and rotation are both kind of wrong, and it's fairly distant from what it should be. So we can just use the tools at our disposal to sort this out. So if we count our keyframes right now, we're up to 3. We're not doing 15 for these 15 frames, we're up to 3 keyframes. We go here, let's see if that's the worst frame. If you do Alt on the keyboard and then use an arrow key, you can go between your keyframes, and one of these goes halfway between your next keyframes. Control goes halfway between them. So if you want to look at the midway point, you can just press Control and jump through it. So on this occasion, I think the mid frame is probably the one we want to look at, or maybe this frame. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab from the pivot point of the shape, which is this guy's elbow, and just rotate to where the middle of the shape is. And you see why this is important in a minute when we turn motion blur on. And then we go to the edge of the motion and line this up with his elbow again. Rotate around, move it in position, scale it up. And if we look, we've got just a couple cheeky points getting out of place. But I'm not moving them much, and I'm definitely not moving them along the line. I'm basically moving them parallel to the spline we're drawing. So something like that, and then we'll go in the middle, see how it looks. Needs a bit of a fix. Just maybe move it over slightly so that it's in the center of the thing, like that. And we'll see how this looks. This may be one of those things where you might need to refine it, but for now, we'll check it out. So next up, I'm going to take my Roto, and I'm just going to copy it so that I don't mess anything up. And then afterward, if we create a match move with the same reference frame, what it should do, I'm just hitting K there to make copy node, is it should match perfectly onto our moving plate now. So we've got all that motion combined, and we didn't have to worry about the camera motion, we only had to worry about the arm. But it's got all that motion, all the jitter, all everything, all together. I don't like putting my transform nodes right under my Roto shapes, because what you're doing is you're making an alpha, and you're sort of generating some pixels, then you're filtering those pixels, and then you're applying that alpha channel. What I like to do is I like to make my transform, and I'm control double clicking to bring this out as a floating window, because I like to work with one property bin because I'm simple and I get scared if there's too many things. If you just click on your root here and click on the transform tab, you can control drag all these curves over so that it's got matching transform information, so that now the raw roto shape and those splines themselves, which we still have access to control, will all now match. And so now all you need to do to make your roto look really nice is go in the roto shape and turn on your Motionblur. And make sure your shutter matches. For most cameras it's probably a shutter over half, which means that the shutter is open for half of one frame. But sometimes this changes. This is the equivalent of a shutter angle of 180 degrees, which means that if you imagine a full circle, it only goes to half. Ooh, only goes to a half. But there are some cameras that, sometimes people shoot stuff with a shutter angle of 172.8 degrees, which is the equivalent of 1/48th of a second instead of 1/50th of a second. So it depends on whatever you're working on. But yeah, now we have our roto shape with matching matching motion blur. And when we pre-mult this now, it'll look pretty good. This edge here, you're going to think, oh, I need to grab my roto and pull it in because I'm getting dark edges and we don't want the background in our roto shape. That is totally wrong. That's a misconception that I had for a while. But that's not something you need to worry about at all, because when we get onto edge treatment, this is where that starts to get fixed. So once you've handled your roto over, if you're using the roto for a paint task or for a comp task or passing it onto a comper, yourself or them will then handle that edge treatment. And I'll show you a quick example of why that's kind of useful. So here, if you look, when we merge this over, you're getting this blue edge, and when it's in motion, you might not even notice it, but when you submit something and it gets reviewed or it gets like tech checked or something, that will get flagged and that'll be a problem. And so Nuke's got a really great tool now called Edge Extend, which you can plug into something with an alpha, and it will pre-mult it and extend your edge up to that alpha. And as you erode it inward, you can pull that in like this. And so what this is doing is it's cutting into your image like this. So we have this. And what it's doing is it's cutting into your image like this. And then it's taking that color here and then doing the equivalent of blurring it outward and making that your new color. And that's all that's doing. And then it's bringing the original alpha channel back in like this and making that your new edge. So if you look, these have really, really similar results. But this only does your edges, whereas this you'd have to merge your edges back over and do some other stuff. So it depends. I mean, this isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of tool, but it helps a lot. So now when we merge this over, you'll notice we've got really decent edges. And yeah, hopefully that explains just the core fundamental principles of what you should be doing when you're doing roto, and how to do it properly. You shouldn't just be leaving it as your sort of black edge and then just like putting a blur on it and hoping that works. That's not right. But I thought that was it for kind of a while, so don't feel mistaken for thinking that. Awesome. Hope this helped, and they'll get progressively more complicated as time goes on. Bye.